recognize our familiar plaque, which will be given to each of the people, when each of the homeowners who gets an award. There are several categories, and some of them, they're a little wobbly. You could go back and forth between them: restoration, rehabilitation, preservation, reconstruction, and infill. This year, you can see the checked ones. We only have 3 of those covered this year. So we'll proceed. We have about 10 awards, I think. The restoration, certainly that is a major one, and that means really fixing things, returning them to the way they were. This is a good example here. This is and someone I'm sure is going to hit me if I talk too long, but can't stop but mention that this is the remnant of an estate designed in 1879 by Burnham and Root firm in Chicago, the only Burnham building surviving, I think, in Lake Forest. It was a stable. It was rehabbed, adaptively reused as a home and doctor's office by Dr. Palmenter. He moved in 1925. The work was done by Stanley D. Anderson. And the house was then owned by the Parmenters. 2 generations of the McLaughlin family. Mrs. Shank was the 2nd generation. And then only just a couple of years ago, the Brush family bought the house. And they have just recently been working very hard on doing some restoration work around the house. And returning the surfaces to the way they looked. I mean, it was in one family for a long time, and so that was appropriate. We have the people to mention include the original, Mr. and Mrs. David Brush, if they could come forward. They're not here. Oh, this will be quick then. The original architect, Burnham and Root, they're dead. Stanley Anderson, he's dead. What can I mention now? For the Lake Forest Garden Club members that are here, the McLaughlin's landscape was done by Helen Hazler, who was an old-time Lake Forest Garden Club member. And then Kendall Winter redesigned a garden around 2000 when a tree came down. So there's been that work done. So I'm sorry about that. Okay, I guess I can keep moving. All right, next. Rehabilitation. This means it's bringing it back to life and fusing it with new life. And we have some of this example we'll see in just a minute here in the building. First, this one you really have to keep me quiet for a while. This one, 435 East Illinois Road. It's built in 1869 originally, 1869. This house has, it doesn't look like that, 1869. It was E.S. Wells, who was one of the very earliest grocery merchants in Chicago, wholesale grocery merchants. His partner was the first Chicago grocery merchant from the 1830s. E.S. Wells was Satterley, and he was his original partner. The house was built in 1869. He was also a founder, and around that same time, he was president of the YMCA movement. John V. Farwell in town here built the first building for them, so he was part of that founding core group. His wife died after many years, and in the 1890s, the house was redone. And I'm saying I think it's by Charles Frost. I don't have any way to prove that, but it looks like other Charles Frost projects of the period. And it has been restored with the Mellicar Company, Mellicar Architects firm recently. So it's a wonderful thing. But Carter and Drake are gone. Charles Frost is gone. But we can certainly celebrate the Mellicar firm and Mr. and Mrs. Allen Laufenberg, the owners. Thank you very much. Here we go. Don't be shy, right? Okay, this is this wonderful sort of country house that's on 222 on Wensia Road. Was around 1950s house by Ralph Hutzek, who was an important Chicago architect who built the Aragon Ballroom, for one thing. Lots of apartments along Lakeshore Drive. One of the purple one in No Man's Land, if you know that apartment building, and several houses also. And this has been reimagined and reconfigured, rehabilitated by the Poltons. And this house is, so it's Sharon Harvey and David Polton are the owners, and they are also the people who did the project work. It sits on a very large, spacious site with beautiful gardens, and it's a wonderful place. So, Sharon, there we are. All right. Okay, the Church of the Holy Spirit. This is not a new building, folks. This is 1902 building by Alfred Granger, Frost and Granger Company. Many additions by Stanley Anderson into the modern times. But the difficulty is that some people were having trouble getting up the steps. And so they were redone with great care and thought by wardens of the church who thought about this a great deal, how to do this best, worked finally with architect Tom Rakovich to make this accessible to people and to make it not be too obtrusive in their sight. So I think they did a great job, and Tom did a great job, and they did a great job picking him and working with him. So if we could call them forward. Thank you very much. I know Tom is here, and there must be a warden or two, right? Good. And Craig Bergman, yes. Did all the planting, yes. Thank you. Congratulations. Oh, I can actually say this is my photograph. But this is Forest Park. This is an example I mentioned it earlier in my report, but this is a middle landscape. It's not nature exactly untouched by humans. It's not an urban park. It's a wonderful place in between, and it's finally been realized its full potential in this recent work. Stephen Stimson was associates in Massachusetts. Were chosen after reviewing several people by the Lake Forest Garden Club, who presented the design for the thing to the city, the owners. The implementation was carried out by a Forest Park Project, formal 501c3 group with a website that you can see more about this on. And lots of people worked on this, and Cliff Miller is circled out here, but certainly Craig worked on this also, but I think Craig's going to be up here a lot of times. And I don't think Cliff is actually here, and I'm sure Mr. Stimson didn't make the trip. But we have some good Garden Club friends, and we have Joan Dupre, who was the co-chair from the Lake Forest Garden Club part here, and we may have a city representative. Do we have a city representative? Well, Joan's going to do a solo act then. Come with us. So this project started in 2007 or so, back with the city, contacting the Garden Club to ask them to work on that as a centennial project. Garden Club was founded in 1912, so came pretty close. Yeah, it was finished in 2015. That's good. All right, so here's the plan. And thank you very much for all your hard, long work. Yes. Joan represents many, many people who worked on this, and I think the president originally at that time was Judy Bogus, our own Judy Bogus, who serves on the historical and the Preservation Foundation. And so we thank everyone who had a hand in this and made this really an exemplary, nationally significant project. Okay, next one. The Deer Path Inn. This one, there's a little sheet that many of you picked up, written by moi, that you can see the Henry Ives Cobb house on the right. and it's actually on the left in the photograph. But what's really interesting is on the back are the names of lots of the old founding people, and these are some of these people I'm sure have people who are descendants here that are here today. So be sure to look through and see if you recognize any of your antecedents, some of you, because these were all the shareholders that helped create the money to build the inn in the first place. And so we're eternally grateful to all of their efforts. Now, we are going to call up Mr. for the inn itself. Well, the work was done by Jones and Jones in 1928. Stanley D. Anderson, he did the 1938 renovation because there was a fire. Big fire. There's actually a picture of it out here. There's a film copy someplace. The building burned. So they had to redo it completely. It was then, it went through several renovations since I arrived in the early 70s to be what it is today, but it needed to be repaired significantly just recently. And thanks to the efforts of many, it was made possible. Mark Nauer is not here, but his firm did a lot of the work. Frank Monterio is here. His firm did interiors. Our group doesn't really recognize interiors per se, but we'll recognize Frank anyway, because unofficially, because his interiors are great. Matt Barba, are you here? There we are, right there. So if you'd come forward to, and we also have Craig, another one. Craig's our big winner here. Craig Bergman, landscape architect, and Frank's coming too. Good. Preservation. And this is just maintaining things, keeping it nice, and doing a great job. And this is theoretically the highest award. Market Square. Well, we can have a long discussion about whether it's the centennial or not. But let's say it's the centennial this year that people began to move into the Market Square complex. And this has been wonderfully, lovingly renewed in this past year by the L3 real estate firm and the OKW architects, and it's just been a delight to watch. We've gotten inside reports from Sharon Harvey, who's told us how it's been going too, and I think we're very pleased to be able to see this thing paid forward again in this recent time. Are any of those people present? So, moving along. Okay, this is the Priebe House, and this is again one. You have to stop me, I won't talk too long. 1860s barn on the Stowe property. It was then later owned by Bradley and then by the Henry C. Durand until the turn of the 19th century to 20th. The barn was then part of the Franklin P. Smith estate into the 1950s. Then it was separated off. It was rented by the Priebes for several years and for about a decade, and then they bought the barn themselves as their children got bigger, and they bought the barn and hired I.W. Coburn to renovate it, to adaptively reuse the whole place as a house. His associate who was in charge of the project with him was Edward Noonan. Many of us know Ed Noonan Buildings here in town. So this is a wonderful thing, an 1860s barn, cow barn, that has been paid forward all this time and lovingly protected by for over half a century by its steward. And is Mrs. Priebe here today? No? Oh, yes. Yes. There we go. Goody. Thank you for allowing me to share with the house. And this is preservation again. And that was preservation because that renovation was over 50 years ago, so it becomes historic after 50 years. This is a house that's not been changed at all, going back to 1925. This house is Stanley D. Anderson, designed for a woman in town who was a school teacher, Mrs. McGee, who came into a little legacy and built the house for herself and her siblings. And it's now owned by Mr. and Mrs. Jim Vermillion. And they've taken great care of it, and we hope they continue to do so. Are they present? This is the theater building built by Albert Lasker on one of the 40 buildings on his estate in Southwest Lake Forest. The interior originally was designed by Rapp and Rapp, the movie people who did all the movie palaces. The house has been adaptively reused for some time, but it's just recently been, the exterior has been lovingly cared for. Windows, I guess, have been kept off of the front to maintain the sort of character of the building, but there are windows on the sides, and this building sits on the estate, as it always has, in a nice space. So the architect is, Melcar Associates again, and Mr. and Mrs. Mark Saran, if they're here to get an award. And we know that Diana's here. Sarans are here. Good. Come forward, please.
I think the Sarans are away.
Thank you again, Diana. Yeah. Oh, backwards. Okay, so here are 10 places, fairly significant number of places, all over town, from the Lasker Estate clear up into the oldest parts of Lake Forest. And I think we can congratulate all the people, all the professionals who made this possible, all the owners who made this possible, and we thank them all. So I think we're ready to start enjoying our trip, our visit around. And there are going to be a couple of groups that are going to go, is that right? Where we go to meet them? Marcy, where do we start with groups?
Made it a really nice afternoon for us. Thank you.